Welcome to my ongoing experiment with the PENTAX QS1 with vintage lenses for wildlife photography or sports. So what are my conclusions to date? Well, a number of things. First of all, you've definitely got to have some sort of a viewfinder hood so that you can see the viewfinder on the back properly in any kind of outside light conditions, so you can focus. Because if you're going to put a vintage lens on, it's going to be manual focus, and you've got to be able to see the viewfinder properly so that you can get a good focus. Now, the camera does have quite a good focus fringing system on it, which helps a lot, but you've still got to be able to see it in all lighting conditions. Now, maybe in your part of the world you might not need this, but here in Australia with our bright, sharp sunlight, you definitely need that particular piece of equipment. About $35. The cameras, you can buy a PENTAX QS1. I bought this one from Taiwan on eBay with a kit lens for, I think it was about $270, including delivery. So $35 for that, $270 for that. I use a number of adapters, but I've settled on paying a bit more money from B&H Photographic and getting the photodiox adapters for this camera. Why? Because they tend to fit a bit tighter here on the bayonet fitting. And also the shape of the photodiox adapter, it's got more taper on it. So this is a physically small camera, and it's something you don't think of when you're buying adapters, but when you're trying to fit plates on and fittings and fixtures and so on, you find that the shape of the photodiox adapter, because it's more slender than most of the Chinesey things, it just works, you know, without having to think about it. So it might cost you $30 for a photodiox adapter. That's what this one costs. Lenses. To be honest, you need to have the very best quality glass you can get. I mean, think you're using a small sensor camera. You want to use ISO 100 or something like that to get rid of the graininess of a small sensor camera, and you want to use fast shutter speeds if you're photographing birds or sport. So there are lots of contradictions there, but basically it adds up to one simple thing. You need the very best quality glass you can get. Now this of course is a contradiction in terms. You've paid $270 for a camera, and I've got a Carl Zeiss lens that is a vintage lens that I paid $3,000 for as a vintage lens. You would not put a $3,000 lens on a $270 camera, would you? Well, not logically. However, the camera does have a very large crop factor, which increases the focal length, the equivalent focal length of any lens, by 4.7. So, for example, this 200mm lens comes out as 940mm, which in my opinion is what you've got to have for wildlife photography, especially if you're trying to photograph birds that are very nervous and that kind of thing. At least for me. I mean, if you're prepared to get up at the butt crack of dawn and wear camouflage clothing and lay in the mud, maybe you can use shorter lenses, but I need 900mm. But this is 940mm. Now, this was not a very expensive lens. Why? Because it's Russian. And there's the answer I've come to with making this lens work. Now, what sort of image can you get out of a Russian lens with a long focal length on a PENTAX QS1? Well, here's a bit. This is just down the bottom of my street. We have a perch there for the pelicans to get comfy so we can film them. You notice it's a little bright, and although the quality gets washed out as you go onto YouTube, in reality the lens needs a longer sun hood on it. The Helios 442 is the same, and until I get at least a 40mm deep sun hood, I'll continue to get this little lightening in the image, but other than that I find it quite sharp and pleasing. Okay, so look, this is my first attempt at using this particular lens, but I've had very good results with a Helios 442 lens, 58mm focal length lens. Quite a famous vintage lens, of course. Well, this should be equally as famous. This is the Jupiter 21M. It's a 200mm f4 prime. Now, how much would you pay for a very good quality f4 prime lens, normally, of 200mm focal length? Well, look, really, if you want to buy Zeiss, Carl Zeiss or Hasselblad or something like that, you're talking about thousands. I paid $130 for this. And I could have got them cheaper, but this one was described and arrived to be in mint condition. It's used, but it was hardly ever taken out of its case. I was very lucky. Virtually brand new optics in it, it's in as new condition is the way I describe it. I was probably a bit lucky, but be prepared to pay a little bit more and watch the descriptions of the lens in, if you're on eBay or, whatever system you're using to buy on the internet, and you'll get a good quality lens. Now this will work well for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a direct copy of a Carl Zeiss sonar lens, but instead of paying, $1,000 or whatever that cost, you're paying $130 Australian for it. That's what I paid for this lens. It's an f4 prime, it works. And those are my conclusions. If you want to have a low price setup that works, then accept the fact that you're going to have the limitations and the benefits of prime lenses. Zoom lenses are just too soft. If not in all parts of the zoom, at various parts of the zoom you get a lot of photographic chromatic aberration and the softness is terrible. But if you want good quality images, then go for primes. Don't waste your money doing anything else. And that's my results so far. So how does this setup work practically? Well, I'll tell you that I think it's going to work very well with sport photography, motorsport and so on, for a simple reason. Because it's an f4 lens, I can go down to f4 and still get a good image. In fact, that little bit of footage you saw just then was actually taken with aperture f4, ISO 100 with a very fast shutter speed. This was, what was I using? 1/2000th of a second on the video footage. But when you're taking even still photography, you can use fast shutter speeds with this lens and get really good quality images. What this equates to is, if I'm at the motorsport park, I sit myself up at a corner with my prime lens, pick the right spot, so that place where all the guys crash all the time, and you can get the fantastic footage of all the anguish on their faces as they're crashing. I set up there. I can get the shutter speed fast enough so that I can freeze the image. I can go to ISO 100, so I'm not going to get too grainy an image out of it, and I'm going to have a good result. For how much? That whole setup, camera, the viewing hood, the adapter, the Russian lens, less than $600. Now what's the equivalent? Well, of course you can get a much better image out of an APS-C Nikon lens with a 600mm Sigma on it, but how much does that cost? Okay, so if it's a hobby for you and you want to muck around and you're happy to accept the limitations of a small sensor camera, you've got virtually no low light capability with this setup, by the way, it works well. Okay, see you.